right, well, welcome to this Intercultural Learning Opportunity, which I've titled Understanding Opportunity, Understanding Ourselves. And I'm going to be introducing you to a tool called the Opportunity Atlas in the presentation. So hopefully you have access to a laptop. All right. So we here at SNU all share a goal of wanting to make our campus and not just our campus, but our community, an intercultural, culturally responsive and beloved community of reconciliation that reflects the kingdom of God. Those are the words that Dr. Lena is trying to make our mission here at SNU. And I know many of us want to be a part of that and believe really deeply in this mission. So if we're wanting to become an inclusive and culturally responsive community, then why have I titled this talk, Understanding Ourselves, like understanding each of ourselves individually? That is because an important first step in cultural responsiveness is learning about one's own self. So you have to learn about yourself as an individual in order to really become a culturally responsive person who can predict and understand how our words are going to land on people that we're communicating with. We can't do that. We can't make those predictions. We won't have that understanding if we don't first understand our own selves and our values and how our identities and experiences shape our values. Here I've got some quotes from a paper that is, analyzing this issue. And you want to understand ourselves, our values, our identities. And in order to gain this insight into ourselves, we have to really explore our identity. Some parts of our identities are easier for us to notice and consider. For instance, I'm sure that all of you watching this have thought quite a bit about how your faith has shaped your values and your life experiences. And a big part of why you've done that is probably because you're in an institution that constantly asks you to do this. We practice faith exploration and development with our students constantly in the classroom. We're thinking about how to integrate it into our content materials. We have practices, daily, weekly, semesterly practices where, this is a big part of what we do to gather together and worship and think about and talk about our faith. So that one is a little bit easier, I think, for most of us to think about how our faith has developed our experiences. But other parts of our identity are a lot harder for us to see. And that's especially true when that aspect of our identity aligns with the dominant culture around us. So, for example, my students of color tend to have a lot more developed insight into how race structures life, and they understand themselves as raced individuals much more easily than I do, or than what I hear from my white students like that. And that's because the dominant culture in the US is one that has established whiteness as the norm. And so it's, for students who don't fit within that norm, like race as a category, as a part of their identity, comes to the surface for them. And so it's a lot easier for them to notice. And so because the dominant culture is one that has established whiteness as the norm, I as a white person don't really notice and don't think of myself as raced, because my race does allow me to move through the world in this sort of default position where I'm considered the default. But when I move into spaces where whiteness isn't dominant, then I suddenly become very aware of myself as a white person. Now, so race is one that I don't notice. I have to work harder to notice because I am white. But when it comes to gender, in this case, like I am reminded of the fact that I'm a woman much more frequently. And that's because, you know, our world is one in which maleness is sort of the default, it's the norm. And so I'm constantly aware of the fact that I am a woman, I'm reminded of that. And this guides like the choices that I make. So, you know, thinking about like, you know, I'm aware that I'm a woman when I go to park my car in a, you know, kind of empty parking lot at night. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm a woman and I have to think about how do I best protect myself. You know, I think about that when I decide whether to wear my earbuds when I'm out in public. I definitely think about the fact and notice the fact that I'm a woman if I walk into a room or a classroom full of men. It becomes very, very apparent to me. And so I'm much more easily able to see my femaleness. So we want to explore our identity. Sometimes that can be hard to do. It's harder, it's tricky to do when the dominant culture, when you're a part of that dominant culture in many ways. One of the byproducts of our identity and the places and environments that we have existed in our formative years is the opportunities that we have had access to. And these two, that access to opportunities are one of those things that's harder to see. And I think that this is especially so. Also, like this is reinforced for us in the US because we have this idea of the American dream that says if you just work hard, then you can be successful, or you will be successful if you just work hard. And you know, being successful is usually defined as like achieving economic stability and independence, owning your own home, being married with your 2.5 children. So both people who do and don't achieve the American dream often attribute where they do end up in their life to their own choices and their decisions, whether they achieve that or don't. And they don't often stop to consider the opportunities that they had available to them or not that might have impacted where they've ended up in life. So am I the product of my choices or my environment? You know, I would posit that it's both. We're both. My students have told me that our own Dr. Brand has this great little aphorism, which I've put up there for you, that we all have choices to make, but we don't all have the same choices, which is a great way of reminding us that like personal choice can only take us so far. We're sort of circumscribed by the choices that we do have in front of us. So in the last couple of decades, public health experts and physicians have become more and more aware that health is not just a simple matter of input and output. So what I mean is like that idea that many of us still have, that if you exercise, eat well, don't smoke, drink, or go with girls who do, then you will have good health and a long life. But it turns out that that is definitely not the only key to understanding who is healthy or not. And so this sort of model of thinking about health is referred to as the social determinants of health. So here's just a quote from a public health organization. Your zip code can affect you more than your genetic code. For example, for people living in the Chicago Loop, life expectancy is about 83 years. On the other hand, those living 3 train stops south of downtown in Washington Park have a life expectancy of only 69 years. The gap in life expectancy between these 2 neighborhoods is larger than the life expectancy gap between the US and Honduras. So what people have access to and how they experience life in these places has a huge impact on their health. So there's nothing magic, obviously, about the zip codes themselves. Like those numbers themselves don't make the difference. But what it is that life is different in those different zip codes. And looking at these social determinants of health groupings, like I think it's fascinating that only one of them Really, this one, healthcare access and quality, is just 1/5 of the puzzle of what actually impacts people's health. So I think these are important, so I'm going to read them out. But neighborhood and built environment is one, social and community context is another, economic stability is another, and education access and quality. So all of these 5 groupings go into determining somebody's health outcomes. And, that's when we say health outcomes, we're not just talking about length of life, but also people's risk of cancer, stroke, heart attack, and those sorts of things. But these social determinants don't just shape our health outcomes, but they also shape our opportunities, which impact other parts of our lives. So you may have been wondering, like, why are we talking about social determinants of health when we're supposed to be talking about ourselves? So this is why I'm just sort of trying to show you that this is analogous. Like, this is, we have something similar that happens in all of the contexts of our life, not just in health, but those social determinants are impacting us in many different parts of our lives. So these social determinants impact our opportunities, and these opportunities are going to shape many other aspects of our lives, and they also continue to shape our health. And where we live has a lot to do with the opportunities available to us and whether we're able to access them, and then that shapes the future that our lives will take. So, I want to tell you a story before we start talking about the Opportunity Atlas to explain what I'm trying to say. So I could tell my story, and if I didn't stop to think about the opportunities, this is the story I could tell about myself and how I got to be here where I am, with a good, stable job at SNU, a highly respected profession, where, I have a lot of economic stability. I am part of a 2 income home. I own my own home out in Piedmont, a really nice place. My kids attend, a very nice school district, well-performing, and we don't have, my husband and I don't have debt beyond, the mortgage that we're paying off on our home. And so the story I could tell about how I got to this point, it could go like this. So I worked really, really hard when I was in high school. I didn't play around. I didn't make bad choices, and I chose not to get pregnant. I, didn't party. So I never, got into, any sort of trouble that sometimes teenagers get into when they are intoxicated. And I was a Bible quizzer. And so, that was my big extracurricular activity. And that was one that both kept me out of trouble, but also like really helped me to learn to study well and to be able to take in large amounts of information and hold on to that. And so because of that, I got really good grades when I was in high school. I did very well on the SAT and the ACTs, had high scores. I also worked, because I didn't just study, but I was hardworking. I worked my last year of high school so that I could have spending money, and also so that I could build my resume. And then because of this hard work that I had done and the good choices that I had made during high school, I was able to get a full ride to SNU. I also got some money from the state of Oklahoma in addition to that. But while I was at SNU, I continued to work, even though I didn't have to, because I wasn't using that money to pay for my schooling. But I worked, I had several jobs. I worked for Dr. Hackler in the general education program, and I tutored, and I was a paper grader. So I worked several different jobs over the years, took my classes seriously. And I did very well in school, had a 4.0, did well on the GRE. And I was then able to get a full ride to Rice. So I was, had my school paid for, as well as got a stipend, a living stipend. And the program that at Rice does not require their graduate students to work for basically, very low wages and teaching like 6 hours of comp. We didn't have to do that. We had very minimal work that was required of us beyond our own classes. So I was actually able to have a job while I was in grad school, because I didn't have these huge TAing, expectations on me. And so I was able to get, some experience working at a journal, and got some more spending money. And I wanted to be, financially prudent while I was in graduate school. And so I decided to, take some of my money that I had saved up and purchase a condominium rather than just renting an apartment the whole time I was there. And so I bought, this apartment. And then when I moved back to Oklahoma City, I was able to sell that and come out with a decent little chunk of cash that I would not have had otherwise. And then I was able to take that money and, together with my husband's money, as soon as we got married, we were able to, purchase a home and then, move that money into a second home. And so that has gotten us to where we are. I also got I also got a job in my field directly out of graduate school. So again, I could say because of my hard work and the fact that, I had been on top of things and was a good job candidate, I was able to land a job in my field immediately and get to work on living life and being successful. So that's a story I could tell. But it's often like, I think those are the kinds of stories, that's what we remember, because I do remember like working hard as a student all of those years. I did work for what I had. However, that doesn't look at all of the opportunities that I had along the way that helped me be able to make those choices and for my hard work to pay off in the way that it did. So, I was fortunate to come from a 2-family home where, my mom was able to stay at home. I had a culturally rich childhood where we got to travel. I visited many museums. My parents encouraged me to read. I had an aunt who every Christmas would give me tons and tons of books. That was, always the best part of my Christmas, was getting all of the books that she, as a elementary school teacher, had gotten from book orders that year. And so my learning was encouraged. Also, my dad, although he was a first generation student himself, he actually got a PhD. And so both he and my mother were first generation college students, but I was not, because they had attended college and my dad graduate school. And so I grew up understanding what a PhD was. And in fact, like just assumed that like getting a PhD is what you did, if you were somebody who was good at school. And so I grew up thinking that a PhD is my end goal once I decided I actually could not become a vet when I did not do very well in biology, did not have a talent for that. So I didn't know what my PhD was going to be in or why necessarily I even wanted one, but that was my goal my assumed goal from high school, is that's where I'm going to end up. And my parents, of course, like there was never a question that I would go to college. I was supported in that. I did not have to work when I was in high school. So like the studying and, being able to put in time on my extracurricular that I enjoyed and was also really good for me academically, I was able to do that because I didn't need to work to help support my family. And in fact, my mom, who had experience having to work in high school, like that was something that she didn't want for me, but we were in a financial position where I didn't have to do that. And so the fact that I didn't have to work. I was able to put in that time at home to do well in school. And also I had a computer at home, which this was a time when definitely not everybody had computers, but I never did not have a computer in my life as a child. So as soon as we were writing papers, I was typing those up on the computer, working with computers, printing out my papers for school and things like that. So technology, I had access to that at home. I had access to the internet, which again, like all of that translated to more access to opportunity for me to go further because of those tools. So I didn't have to work in high school, but my last year of high school, I was in the work study program. So I got time off of school and I did work. I worked at Halliburton, which is where my dad was employed. So he used his connections to get me one of the spots. There were other students from the high school who worked there, but he got me a job there. And so I was able to, did a lot of sitting around getting paid for doing nothing in that job. But there was also opportunity for me to learn lots of Microsoft software, including ones that, were a little more advanced, like Access. So I started understanding like how databases worked and those sorts of things. My dad was, very aware of this and like, you need to build your resume, you need to learn these skills. And, he helped me put together my resume, which then when I applied to SNU, Dr. Gwen Hackler saw come through. And so she immediately, before I even came to SNU, reached out to ask if I wanted to work for her as her student. And so as her student assistant in the Gen Ed program. And so from her, I learned all sorts of web tools. This was a time when HTML was still being used to write web pages. And so from Dr. Hackler and the work that she had me doing, I learned those skills. I also worked with Dr. Bryant on building Univisor in the code that he had created himself. And so because I had those job opportunities, not only did those give me something to put on my CV as I was applying to grad school, but they also, I got a lot of mentorship from Dr. Hackler. And she's the one who really guided me on that grad school process and, what I needed to look at and encouraged me, and how to put all of that together. And I don't know that I would have had her mentorship had I not already come in with all the skills so that she had kind of plucked me out before I even came to SNU. And so, so again, it's like the opportunities that I had to learn Access because I had a job at my dad's Fortune, 500 company that he worked at. Like that's how I got to build those skills. So it wasn't necessarily like, yes, I took advantage of them. Like I did learn to do those things, but those were opportunities that other people didn't have. So I have another friend, I have a friend from my high school years and, she had a job that she had to get in order to have any money to spend. She wasn't supporting the family, but to have, kind of any spending money. She had to work and, she didn't have a dad with connections and she didn't have a car, which I also did. So that's another advantage that I didn't talk about. She had to get a job where she could work. And, so the job that she could get was that she could walk to. So the job she got was at Sonic. I don't think if Dr. Hackler had seen the Sonic experience on my resume as I was coming into SNU, that she would have, she would have plucked me out and asked me to be her student assistant based on that, because that doesn't show, any set of skills that she thought would be useful. So, and it's not that my friend couldn't have done that work, but she didn't have the opportunity to build those skills, which then got picked up later. Thinking about, I had a car. So I was able to do lots of things. I was able to go to that job when I was in high school. And my parents paid for the car and they paid for my gas. I was not having to support that. So my options were very unlimited in many, many ways. Moving to, my time at Rice, like the whole decision to buy a condo rather than rent, I was only able to do that because I had all of this money that I had accumulated from the fact that my parents supported me, aside from like, they let me keep the money that I earned, but they were paying all of my other expenses. So, I didn't have to worry about paying my insurance, my car, my gas, all of those sorts of things. And so I, had this money that I had saved up from my jobs and, from extra scholarship money that I had received from the state, and was able to, put that towards a down payment. But I still had to have my parents co-sign for me. So that's another thing. So I could say, well, I used my own money, but I did use my own money, but I had to have my parents sign along with me as well. And so that's another opportunity that not everybody has. And so like it snowballs, and the fact, like, so it starts really early on, but basically, the fact that I was born into this middle class household where my parents, not only saw the importance of education, but also had the opportunity, like the ability to allow me to really take advantage of that, is what set me up to get where I am today. So it's the product of work and choices, but it's also a whole lot just about the opportunities that I had that my friend didn't have. And so I think it's really, really important to understand that about each of our stories, to look for those places that we might not realize we were taking advantage of opportunities that we had, or that we didn't do as well as maybe society expected us to. And that's not necessarily our fault, but that's because we didn't have those opportunities, or in fact, there were even barriers put in our way. So now I'll turn to the actual subject of this talk, which is the Opportunity Atlas. So this is a tool that was created by an economist from Harvard and funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, that allows us to see a really vast amount of information about life outcomes down to a very granular level. And the data comes from the census and from the IRS. And what it does is track the outcomes of 20 million Americans from childhood to their mid-30s in all 70,000 census tracts, with the ability to analyze findings by race, gender, and income. In the past, we could measure neighborhood wealth and poverty at any given moment, but never before could we see how these early childhood experiences can influence income into adulthood. So that is the Opportunity Atlas. So here are some of the things we'll look at it in a second, but here are some of the outcomes that you can specify that you want to look at. Educational attainment, and that will be broken down into high school and college. Financial status, employment status. So are you working? Also, how many hours do you spend working? Marriage status, incarceration risk, teenage pregnancy risk, and just social mobility. Are you able to move up or down? And so here is where I would invite you to explore your own home tract on the Opportunity Atlas. So I'll open this up in a second to show you, but you'll visit this website, which you can just type in opportunityatlas.org and it will pop up. Put the address in for the home address that you grew up in, or just the area if you moved around, or if you moved to multiple areas, whichever one. Well, you can just explore them all and see what you see. And then you select the outcome that you want to look at specifically in the drop down on the right. I'll show you where this is in a minute. And then you can change the slider bars to look at all groups. You can break it out by SES, so socioeconomic status. You can break it out by race, ethnicity, and also by gender. And if you play around with the slider bars, you will notice probably big differences in the outcomes as you swap out groups. So now we'll hop over to the Opportunity Atlas. And Lynn, you might let me know if that screen is showing.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so you just click through this, begin exploring, and it's telling us how to do it. So this is the slider bar that I was talking about, like where you can change these. Here is where you will put in what you want to look for. I'll just demonstrate on my own. And actually, I grew up really rurally, so my old address was a rural route, and they've actually changed it, and I don't know what it has a fancy town address now, and I don't know what it is without looking at my phone. So I will just have to tell you what tract. So I just put in Duncan, Oklahoma. So that's the town where I grew up, and you can zoom in. Duncan is just a town. It's not a city. So you can see the whole thing without zooming too closely. Okay, so over here, this is the right-hand side. And if you click in this drop down, this is where you can change like what outcome you're wanting to look at. And so they're looking at children who grew up in these tracks. What are their outcomes in adulthood? So they're looking at age 35. What is the typical, the aggregate data? What does it say for the individuals who were born in this area? Where are they now? So you can check on their individual income. You can see how many of them are married. You can check on their spouse's income, and so forth. And some of these, like college graduation, I know, I can just show you. They don't have that data for the tracks, like that's broken out by county. So you won't be able to see all of that. You won't be able to see tract level information for all of these outcomes. We'll put that back on income. Okay, so, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to move around without zooming. Okay, let me get myself oriented. And I'm going to change this to parent income all. So you can see just like hopping around here. So this tract, when we've included all groups over here, in that this group tends to be earning at age 35. They have a household income, we're doing household income of 54,000. This tract has a 55. This tract, we're going down to 37,000. This tract, 32,000. This tract, 42, this one, 43. So we can see that this tract of land and this tract definitely do not fare as well as their neighbors over here, who are almost $20,000 higher a year in income. You can see, let's check incarceration rates. Oh, there it is, second one. And we'll notice quite a difference. So out here on the far side of Duncan, there's a less than 1% incarceration rate. We're at 1.5 in this tract. 1.5 in this tract, 1.2, and suddenly we jump to 2.1 over here, and then 3.2 and 2.1. So you can see there's quite a difference. And on the over here, it's telling us that, like, in comparison to other places, like this is about typical, a little low, I guess, low typical incarceration rate. And here we're into the high incarceration rate. And here we're not quite into the highest level, but getting very high. So compared nationally, this is a pretty high incarceration rate for an area. And so you can play around with this, and this includes parents of all incomes. If we change this to high income, The incarceration rate still goes up here, but not as much. So it's not 3 point whatever it was, but it's 1.6, which is still high. Here it goes down lower. Here it's pretty high still, even for high income. What happens when we just look at low income parents? Look, it's high for this tract of land. So it's getting it being a higher rate overall than the average. And here it goes very high, 4.8, 3.1, 2.7, 2.8, 2.1. And what happens out here? It gets much lower. Parent income like makes a big difference in the outcome, like regardless of the tract of land, but there's still substantial differentiation between it if you sort out those incomes. Let's look back at household income. If we were looking, these are your household income at age 35. Let's see what happens when we move that to people who came from high income families. So now these folks are making $59,000 a year, now $60,000, $53,000, which is higher than what this tract was earlier. If you'll remember, I think it was like 32 or 34. High income families have $61,000 down here and 51. So overall 65 here. So you can see that like there's a big difference. We'll see if you came from a low income family when you were born in this tract, you are now you're likely to be earning 32,000. Here, 33,000, 29, 42. So there's a big difference in the folks whose families were high income earners. They're earning 59 compared to our lower income family is only making 42,000. In the same, so those were all people from the same tract of land, but just looking at the differences in their family circumstances to start with. And then if you break this out, so we're going to go back to income, we're going to look at everybody's income, but like if you sort by race, what is extremely noticeable about Duncan, the town that I grew up in, is that it is extremely segregated when you break down how like who is living where in the town. So the fact that there is not even any data for Black folks in this part of town tells us that this is where the Black people are living in town. And we can look at what difference does race make in this in income in all of these outcomes. You can look at that for them. Hispanic, still pretty segregated. There are specific places. In Asian, apparently we had such a small number that we don't have sufficient data. Hispanic, do we have American Indian? Okay, so we've got natives, native people spread around, but I just think that's it just shows so clearly how there is segregation. And I would love to be able to overlay a map that had to do with redlining, because I would strongly suspect that redlining occurred. Obviously, like this kind of segregation does not happen naturally, but is people are being shepherded into or not allowed to live in certain parts of the city. So okay, so this is what you can do with the Opportunity Atlas. You can always change what you want to look at. You can look at our area up here is really interesting to compare different places. Something you might run into, because I was actually playing with this for Piedmont where we live, and it was so unpopulated at the time that they're pulling this data from 35 years ago that you can't really get any outcomes for living there. So you do have to look at sort of places that were populated at that time. So now get back into my slideshow. Okay, so as you are looking at this, I would suggest that you analyze the differences that you notice when you are comparing these tracks. Obviously, do you notice differences between, not just between tracks, but between similar groups of people across the track? So if you break those down by gender or by race or by SES, think about the differences that you see there. And part of the reason I recommend that you do this with the place where you grew up is because you can think about what it actually looked like, what it was like to live there. Think about the schools. Think about traffic patterns, like who's living by freeways and interstates. And think about environmental hazards. So who lives close to the dump? Or who lives close to a rock quarry or something where you constantly have dust in the air? Who lives close to power plants? Think about distance from healthcare. So if you lived rurally, like I did, like how far away were you from access to doctors and the hospital and things like that? Think about the police presence or lack of it in your area. Because there are places that, the police have a positive presence and arrive on time and are helpful. And there are places that are over policed where people can't they can't just live their lives without, being under suspicion and under surveillance. And then there are places that the police won't even go because they feel like it's too dangerous. So think about what the police presence was like in your area. Distance from higher or lower paying employment, like what's within walking distance? Do you have to have a car to exist, to have a high paying job in your community? Just think about the built environment and how things are laid out. Restaurants, grocery stores, food deserts are a huge issue. So think about like, where are the grocery stores? Where are the affordable grocery stores as opposed to like corner stores? Think about parks and public spaces that are available and think about the quality of the parks. Libraries, how close are they to these spaces? If we go back to the map of Duncan, which I go up, yeah. So thinking about the household income, okay, so I've just cleared it and we're looking at all categories. Like these are the lower income areas of town. And this is also, we had 8 elementary schools, but this is where the lowest performing of those elementary schools were. And of course, lower performing schools, anybody who's been in education knows, is not the result of children who are somehow incapable of learning, but there are systemic failures that lead to schools being lower performing, such as food insecurity, lack of transportation, the undermining of the educational system and an inequitable education system where people, that we don't pay teachers enough. Teachers' jobs are difficult. So the lower paying schools tend to be the underfunded schools, and they can't make up that difference with parents donating if the parents are low income to start with. So anyways, this whole cycle that is perpetuated. But this area is where the lower performing schools were, and then this area is where the higher performing schools were. And I didn't tell you guys, but this is the tract of land that I was born in. So my family came from this one, which fits then with where I have ended up in life. And so, my own exploration of the Opportunity Atlas suggests that, it's probably to be expected. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to my slides here. Go away, Zoom. It's to be expected that I ended up where I did because I had a lot of opportunities because of the place, the space, the family, with their advantages that I was born into. And so yeah, I just want you to take a minute to think about, as you look through this, how have the opportunities that you can see, how those have shaped people's lives in aggregate, how have they shaped yours individually? Have you, had a lot of opportunities that helped you to get where you did, or have you had to overcome a whole lot of hurdles because you didn't have those opportunities? And then I would just leave you with, use this information to help you understand your own story and maybe hidden privileges that you never thought about that you had before. And also, if you, think about what you've overcome, how have you been resilient in spite of these, the hurdles that were placed in there and the advantages that you didn't have, the opportunities that you didn't have. How can this help you understand your students better? We serve a lot of students who are coming from under-resourced places and have experienced this lack of opportunity, and not just lack of opportunity, but barriers and challenges. And so becoming aware of these and how they've operated in your own life, I think can help us to understand our students better. And, both like, those of us who have overcome those challenges, we can inspire and share that story. But those of us who have had more advantageous beginnings, I think, can do the work to sort of start to recognize that privilege and see where we make assumptions about what our students know or what they need or why they're doing the things that they're doing, that will make us a much better and much more culturally responsive instructor. And yeah, how can this help you understand your community that you came from, or the community that you're living in now? I definitely encourage you to play with it and look at where you live now, because it, I think, can help you make sense of things that you see. And then, of course, I'll just leave you with what I always want my students to think about, but how can we use this information as we strive for justice? Going back to, Dr. Lena's words of making that intercultural and culturally responsive and beloved community of reconciliation that reflects the kingdom of God. How we have to think about these things and how our environment and the systems structure people's lives in such a way as to impede that beloved community of God. We have to understand that before we can start trying to figure out how to fix it. And so, yeah, I hope that you are able to learn something about your own story and then think about how it can make you a better teacher or person who interacts with our learners, and then how it can help you make our world a better place. Thank you.